It's round one of the FIDE Candidates, and in this video I'm going to show you an absolutely amazing game played between Alireza Firouzja, 20 years old, representing France, and Praggnanadhaa, only 18 years old, playing for India. It's one of the coolest games of the day. You see a lot of spectacular ideas, a lot of tactical ideas. So I promise you, you will be entertained and hopefully you will learn also something along the way. Let's see what happened in this game. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about this game and what your predictions are for who's going to win this event. So here we go. Firouzja starts the game with one e4. Prag goes for e5. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6. It's the Spanish opening, not a big surprise. Both players have a lot of experience at playing it with both colors. Knight f6. Castling kingside, and now knight takes e4, the open Spanish, one of the favorite lines of Prague. d4, b5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to b3, d5, pawn takes e5. Now white is threatening to take the pawn on d5 and bishop e6. This is the main tabia, as we would like to call it, the main sort of structure you get to see in this opening. White has a bit more space thanks to the pawn on e5. Black has a knight on e4, which is doing pretty well. And there are different ways of playing here. Firouzja goes for the move c3, and black develops its last minor piece to e7. And here the bishop drops back to c2. So one of the ideas for white here is to try to exchange that knight on e4. Not immediately, you don't want to do that with the bishop, but maybe with moves like knight bd2, for instance, and rook e1, trying to force the knight to make a decision whether to trade off pieces or to go away. Bishop g4 is played here, so the bishop pins the knight on f3, and big question is, how is white going to deal with that? Because black is even probably threatening just to take on e5 the pawn. Look at this. Queen goes to e1. This looks strange, as you're placing the queen on a square normally the rook would like to go to. But you're unpinning, and you're even threatening to take on e4 and win a pawn. So what is happening if you just take with the bishop on f3, ruining the structure on the king side? This was not played in the game by black, but it's quite a relevant line. The knight is under threat, so black will be forced now to move the knight away, but that will eventually give white opportunities, possibilities to advance the majority, maybe put a king on h1, the rook can come to g1. It's very interesting and unusual position in the open Spanish. And one tactical point is that now knight takes e5, white cannot take on e4 with the pawn because it runs into knight f3, forking the king and queen. There is this tricky idea, remember this one, queen e2, defending the pawn, and now the knights on the e-file are just hanging. Anyway, this all didn't happen, but it's important background information. Black, after the move queen e1, decided to drop back with a knight to c5. That's the main continuation, and played in an earlier game last year by Praggnanadhaa. Knight bd2, and the knight comes to e6. Typical plan in this opening. So the knight is a nice blockading piece, stopping the white pawn on e5 from advancing any further. At the right moment later on, maybe there's a pawn break like d5, d4 available. So in that game, Praggnanadhaa faced here the move queen e2, which was played by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. But here, Firouzja followed a new idea with the move king h1. So what's the plan here? Why would you ever play here the move king h1? This seems very strange. Well, one earlier game of Gukesh against Yakuboev played black here the move castling kingside, and white's idea is to drop back with a knight to g1. So that's the best square for the knight, strangely enough, but the point is to hit the bishop on g4 and then later march forward with your f-pawn to f4 and f5, kicking the knight away. And imagine you get these pawns there, white has fantastic attacking prospects. So instead of castling, Prag played here the move bishop to h5. And the idea is here to play bishop g6 and try to exchange some pieces. light squared bishops, when they come off the board, white's attacking prospects are not too great any longer. So white played here the move knight to b3. So the knight is on its way, maybe to d4. But here now, knight is no longer defending the knight on f3. So this is the moment black decides to take on f3 anyway. Bishop takes, g takes, double pawns, but are these pawns really weak? Well, if white gets the chance here to advance the pawn to f4 and then f5, I think black is in big trouble with the bishops supporting these pawns, the rook coming to the g file. So therefore the best move here for black is bishop g5, offering the exchange of bishops, but also together with the knight, black is controlling the f4 square. White is not going to take on g5. That helps black to get the queen involved. The queen can attack the pawn on f3 very soon. So rook g1 is a much better idea. Bishop takes c1. And now you would expect maybe white to recapture with the rook. But this knight on b3, it's not doing that much. Knight takes c1 was played. Strange idea, but I guess that this was still some sort of opening preparation by Firouzja. After the move queen h4, the queen looks very active, but the rook comes to g4 to hit the queen. Queen comes to h5, so that the pawn on e5 is threatened to be taken. White cannot play f4 now because the rook will be captured. But we understand white's play as the knight comes to d3 to protect the pawn on e5 one more time. So we have very unusual position. I think has never been seen before at high level. And well, white has a nice bishop, double pawns, but potentially also quite nice attacking prospects. So black needs to already anticipate white's actions on the king side. Maybe knight e7 with the idea to set up a blockade on the light squares. Could be a good plan, but Pragg played castling king side. And now you would like to move the queen so that later on your rook is able to join play. Where to go with the queen? Maybe queen e3 is interesting so that the rook can come over and trying to support the move f4. Maybe the knight can come to c5. That could be an advantage of having the queen on e3. But Firouzja played the move queen e2, also very interesting. But now black is coming up with a great idea. Black played here the move f5, attacking the rook. If the rook goes away, then the diagonal for the bishop will be closed. And the knight on e6 is a great blockader. It's stopping white's main asset, the pawn on e5. And black is in good shape. So therefore white captures, opens up the position, captures en passant, rook takes f6, defending the knight with the rook. And here white played the move f4. And this is interesting because this pawn can become weak. I mean, black has different ideas to attack the pawn a couple of times with its pieces, but white is also creating some sort of attacking ideas against the queen. For instance, if you try here knight takes f4, rook takes f4. If you take on f4, the queen on e2 is hanging, but there is this move, rook takes g7. And on the next move, the queen will be captured because the rook captures on g7 with check. So what should black do? Well, again, I am a big fan of trying to improve the knight from c6. With knight e7, the knight is on its way to f5, and I think black is all right. Yeah, you're just keeping everything defended. But it's always the question whether you should try to set up a blockade or try to attack the weaknesses. And Pragg goes for a different plan. He goes for the move rook h6. He is simply threatening mate in one. Only move here is f3 to protect the rook and more importantly even to open up the second rank so the queen defends the pawn on h2. Rook f8, the rook joins play. So black is looking okay, intending at some point maybe to take the pawn, but okay, right now white is also defending the pawn twice. And here, frankly speaking, I was a bit surprised by Firouzja's move. I think if I would be playing here, I would think, okay, let's get this rook into the game. Rook ag1, maybe the rook is not doing much on the g file as black is defending the g7 square with the knight. Maybe rook e1 looks logical, but on the other hand, the knight is also still defended pretty well by the rook on h6. So I understand on one hand also Firouzja that he doesn't want to decide yet where to place that rook. He played a move queen f2, which is maybe understandable, controlling some dark squares. Maybe at the right moment later on you want to play this move anyway. The queen is making space for the rook to come over to the e file. Rook f6. So the rook is also joining play, and you can see that black is looking for opportunities against this pawn, maybe on the h file. So the question is, who is attacking whom here? Rook e1. Now the rook comes into play. Queen f7 back. So what is the idea? Well, now with the queen back, your rooks are now about to join the attack. And you're attacking the pawn on f4 one more time. And, well, moves like knight e5 to attack the queen, they will just be met by knight takes e5. And you cannot undouble your pawns with f takes because of rook takes f3. That's simply not good. What should white do? I think it's a very complex position. I think position is objectively more or less balanced, but if you, for instance, try here something like bishop b3, which looks incredibly strong to hit the pawn on d5, well, then rook f5 can be played. And the rook is safe now here, as the bishop is no longer hitting that f5 square. So white is not making that much progress. And, well, in the game there followed the move queen g3. Took Firouzja about 17 minutes to come up with this move. Defending the pawn, keeping the h2 pawn defended, but black comes up with a new plan. Rook h5. White played the move a4, broadening the battlefield, putting pressure here, but on the other hand, maybe if you want to play such a move like a4, it could have been better to keep the rook on a1, so that you're intending to infiltrate via the queen side. But let's see, rook f2 h6. So the rooks are hitting this pawn on h2. I mean, it's still the question if you really want to take on h2 and get a position with the queen versus two rooks. Anyway, white played rook e2, overprotecting the pawn. Very tense game. Rook h3. Looks like black is making a lot of progress here. But now, queen goes to e1, setting up more pressure along the e file. What to do? I mean, various options here, but there follow the move rook takes f3. Black is just capturing very sneaky that pawn on f3, and that rook cannot easily be trapped, can easily come back to h3, or even the pawn on f4 can be taken perhaps sometimes. So difficult to say if that rook is a good or a bad piece. But look at Firouzja's idea. He's not giving up that pawn without any reason. He played now this stunning idea, knight c5. Trying to deflect the knight from e6, so that if you do capture that knight, it's rook e8 check, and black will be forced to give up the queen. That is game over. So the knight cannot be taken. That is the tricky idea, how to deal with this threat of just winning that knight on e6. Well, probably a safe move, a clever move here would be to drop back with a knight to f8. It's still a very tense position. Anything can happen. Maybe white can take the pawn on a6. But I like this knight on f8 because you're defending your king, and probably you do give the major pieces the possibility to join the attack again on the h file. Very unclear. In any case, Pragg, fighting for the initiative here, played instead the move queen h5. Looking for counterplay against the pawn on h2, which means the rook on e2 cannot leave the second rank. Rook takes e6 is met by queen takes h2 with checkmate. So what to play here? Very difficult moment, and Firouzja played here a very logical move. Knight takes e6, but according to the machine, and this is an incredibly difficult line, there is this idea of playing the move rook from e2 to g2. So you keep your rook defended, you're keeping the pawn defended, you're even putting pressure against the knight on e6 with your queen. And if you do take on c5 now, it's rook takes g7, and this is leading to checkmate in a few moves, as first the rook enters on g7, then on g8, then the queen comes in on e8, and it will eventually be checkmate. Beautiful tactical line. So after rook e to g2, the only move here for black to stay in the game and to avoid this knight takes e6 idea followed by rook takes g7 is to play here this insane move, knight e5. Why should you sacrifice your knight? Well, just to close that e-file. If you take on e5 with your queen, it's rook f1 with checkmate. Rook g1, queen h2 is checkmate. So, I mean, this is all analysis. Don't get me wrong. We will soon get back to the game where knight takes e6 was played. But after rook eg2, let me show you one more line. Knight e5. If you take with the pawn, now still you want to defend your pawn on g7. Therefore, black shouldn't take on c5. But you play here queen f7. And now if you do take on e6, there is rook f1 and black is winning the queen. It's okay for black. Bishop d3 to protect the f1 square. Now knight takes c5. Attacking the bishop. Material's even, but apparently rook takes g7. Queen takes g7. Now, rather than taking the queen, there is this insane idea of queen g1. I guess this was not spotted by both players. The idea is very simple. To take on g7, and if you take with the queen, there is queen takes g2 with a double attack, winning also the rook. So, how to defend here? Well, also the knight is hanging on c5, so knight e6 only move. Rook takes g7, knight takes g7, and apparently, and this is very difficult. First of all, you have to see all of this, but then secondly, you also have to evaluate this correctly. And I wouldn't see this. This is better for white. Queen g5 with the idea to hit the rook. Rook goes away, queen d8 check, rook f8, queen takes d5. Black is not getting mated, but okay, white is able to take the pawn on b5, and okay, it's very difficult to become active with your rooks because the knight on g7 is it's defending the king, but it's also not very active. So this is better for white, but incredibly tough line to calculate. Especially imagine you're on move 30. So many difficult moments were already in the game where both players had spent a bit of time. We are reaching the time control, and after queen h5, instead of rook eg2, white captured, very understandably, this knight on e6. But the rook is hanging. Queen takes g4. White is an exchange down. But look what Firouzja had in mind. He played now the move knight g5. Attacking the rook, but more importantly, clearing the e-file. Threatening mate in 1, as the king is not able to come to f7. If you take with the queen on f4, it's rook e8. And black can only block on f8 with the queen, it's game over. That's not going to work. If you take with the rook on f4, with the idea that if rook e8 is played, you meet this move with rook to f8, then Firouzja had this beautiful idea in mind. Queen f2. Fantastic, brilliant idea. The queen cannot be taken. The rook is pinned on f8. And if you take on e8, it's queen f7 check, as the knight supports the queen. King h8, queen takes e8, checkmate. So the only move in that case would be to play rook takes h2. Insane idea. If you take with the king, then well, there are checks here, and it's better for black. You can take on g5, or you can take on e8 even soon. So don't do that. But queen takes h2. That's the critical move. After rook takes e8, you take on h7. King f8, queen h8, king e7, you capture the pawn here. The king gotta go either to d8 or to d6, and then there follows a discovered check on f7, and white wins the queen. An absolute brilliant trap spotted by Firouzja far in advance. However, this is also spotted by Praggnanadhaa, and he comes up with the best move in the position. Brilliant idea to defend against this threat of rook e8. He played a move knight e5. He is closing that file, the open file. So the rook cannot come to e8. If you take now with the rook here, which was played in the game, it looks like black is suffering here because rook is hanging, white is threatening mate. It's two pieces against the rook. White is technically winning, but the key idea is that the rook is no longer defending the pawn. Rook takes h2, sacrificing the rook. King takes h2, queen h5 check. The king has to go to the g file, and then it's queen to g4 with check, and it's just winning for. Sorry, it's winning. It's a draw. How can I say it? It's king h1, queen h5, king g2. Players are going back and forth with the pieces, and the game was agreed to a draw. It was not winning for either side. I mean, there was one moment in the game where black slipped and white could have proven an advantage maybe, but it was so incredibly difficult. This is where both players are excelling. It's an incredibly interesting opening. New position, open position, lot of tactical ideas with the major pieces involved. Very sharp game, and it's in a way a very correct result, this draw. I hope you really enjoyed this game. This is a very good sign, a brilliant start of the Candidates Tournament 2024 in Toronto, Canada. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of this game? Share this with your friends if they want to follow the Candidates Tournament as well. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Let me know anyway, what do you think? Who is going to win this event? And I'll be back with more coverage of this brilliant tournament already after only one day. I can say it's an amazing tournament, and we know that things will heat up the more the tournament progresses. So let's see how it goes. Stay tuned and see you soon. Bye bye.